The rain drizzled softly against the glass windows of the Seattle skyline, washing the city in shades of gray and silver. Neon lights from distant cafes flickered like scattered stars, blurred by the mist. Somewhere in the town, a young woman sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers trembling as she clutched a letter she had written, but never intended to send. Naomi Green had loved once so deeply and recklessly that love had swallowed her whole. In her previous life, her devotion had been her undoing. She had bent herself into shadows for a man who never saw her light, tolerated humiliation, and endured countless nights of silent tears. And when despair had finally hollowed her out, she had chosen the unthinkable, swallowing a handful of pills, letting darkness take her away. But destiny, it seemed, was not done with her. When Naomi opened her eyes again, she was not in a sterile hospital room. She was in a grand bedroom, adorned with ivory drapes and crystal chandeliers. Her body felt different, lighter, younger, almost unfamiliar. Panic coursed through her as she stumbled to the mirror across the room. Her reflection stared back at her smooth skin, bright eyes, the face of her 18-year-old self. "No, this can't be real," she whispered, fingertips tracing the curve of her jawline. It was real. Somehow, impossibly, she had been given a second chance. And that was when the door opened. Jonathan Hill stepped inside. Tall, broad-shouldered, his presence commanded the room without effort. His dark suit was perfectly tailored, his gaze sharp, icy blue, like the Pacific waters on a winter morning. Every movement carried the weight of old money and unyielding authority. This man, her husband. Naomi's breath hitched. She remembered him well from her previous life. Jonathan Hill, Billionaire, CEO of Hill Global, is one of America's most powerful men. He had once been her obsession, her unreachable dream. To marry him had been everything she thought she wanted, and yet he had been her coldest torment. His voice was steady, void of warmth as he spoke. "Dinner is in an hour. Don't be late. No, how are you?" No concern, no recognition of the turmoil she felt. Just orders, just distance. In her past life, Naomi would have nodded, whispered an obedient yes, and tried to earn his affection with desperate smiles. But not this time. She straightened her spine, her heart pounding in her chest. "If you want punctuality, ask politely." Jonathan froze for a fraction of a second, his eyes narrowing, as though she had spoken in a language he couldn't understand. Then, with a faint curl of his lips, half smirk, half disdain, he turned and left without another word. The door closed, but Naomi felt the shift within herself. She was no longer that fragile woman who would beg for crumbs of affection. She was Naomi Green, reborn. And this time, she would not crawl. She would rise. The atmosphere at the Hill estate in Seattle was always a quiet luxury. Marble floors, velvet carpets, and paintings worth more than most homes, all symbols of wealth and power. But beneath the polished veneer, Naomi felt the cold stares, the whispers that trailed after her. She doesn't belong here. Jonathan could have married anyone, and he chose her. She's just a poor girl from nowhere, clinging to his name. The comments came from relatives, from society, women sipping champagne at galas, even from Jonathan's mother, Eleanor Hill, a woman whose icy demeanor made Jonathan's look almost tender. Naomi endured their glances, but inside her blood burned. Once she had allowed their words to pierce her soul. She had cried alone, believing their every insult. Not anymore. This time she would show them. Their marriage was one of appearances. Separate bedrooms, separate lives. Naomi, barely 18, was paraded at dinners as Jonathan's wife, but never treated as his partner. She was a name on his arm, a silent presence beside him. One evening at a high society charity gala in downtown Seattle, Naomi walked beside Jonathan under the blinding camera flashes. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Hill, when will we see an heir to the Hill fortune? Mrs. Hill, how do you handle the pressure of marrying into such a powerful family?" Naomi forced a smile, clutching Jonathan's arm for balance. He stiffened at her touch, as though her presence was a burden. Later, inside the ballroom, Jonathan stood with his business associates, ignoring her completely. Naomi was cornered by Daniel Parker, Jonathan's childhood friend, and one of Seattle's most influential bachelors. Daniel greeted smoothly, his smile, too charming, too calculated. "You look radiant tonight, but tell me, how does it feel to be invisible in your own marriage?" His words sliced like a knife, but Naomi's lips curved into a steady smile. "Better invisible than pathetic enough to chase what isn't mine," she replied, her tone sharp yet elegant. Daniel's smirk faltered for the briefest moment. Naomi walked away, her heels clicking against marble, her heart racing with adrenaline. Jonathan from across the room had witnessed the exchange. His jaw tightened. In her room, Naomi sat by the window, overlooking the glittering Seattle skyline that night. The Space Needle glowed in the distance, a reminder that this was America, land of dreams and reinvention. She had been given a second life here. She would not waste it repeating the same mistakes. She thought of her past self, the woman who had died broken and unloved. Tears pricked her eyes, but she brushed them away. No more begging. She whispered, no more chains. Her marriage might have been a gilded cage, but this time she would find a way to turn the key. Jonathan entered her room without knocking. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes lingered on her longer than usual. "You embarrassed Daniel tonight," he said flatly. Naomi looked up, her gaze calm but fierce. "I only told him the truth. If that embarrasses him, that's his problem." A muscle twitched in Jonathan's jaw. "Can you handle this world? It will destroy you." Her voice was steady. "Then let it try." For the first time, Jonathan faltered. There was something in her eyes, something he had never noticed before. Strength. Fire. He turned away, muttering, "Do whatever you want. Just don't expect me to clean up after you." When he left, Naomi allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. He didn't know it yet, but the game had changed. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean, sparkling beneath the moonlight. Naomi stood at the window, her reflection merging with the glittering skyline. She touched her stomach absent-mindedly, unaware of the future that awaited her: betrayals, scandals, heartbreak, but also love that would rise from the ashes. In her first life, she had been broken by love. In this life, she would learn what love truly meant. And maybe Jonathan Hill would learn it too. The Hill estate had always been a mansion of whispers. Beneath its chandeliers and flawless white marble, silence ruled like an emperor. For Naomi Green, silence was heavier than any insult, the sound of her husband walking past her, without a glance, the echo of a life shared yet never touched. In the weeks following that fateful gala, Naomi began to see clearly their marriage was not just distant, but frozen. Jonathan Hill was courteous when society demanded it, and polite in public, but he treated her like a stranger within the walls of their home. They dined at the same table, yet exchanged no words beyond necessity. He returned late from the Hill Global headquarters, sometimes with the faint scent of whiskey and boardroom politics clinging to his tailored suits. Naomi's meals went cold, waiting for him until she learned not to wait. But Naomi was no longer the naive girl desperate for scraps of affection. This Naomi was forged from the ashes of her past. Each cold silence was not a wound, it was fuel. said the polished hallway to Jonathan's study. On one tranquil evening, she could hear the faint clink of glass as he poured himself a drink. "Jonathan," she called softly, pushing the door open. He didn't look up. His gaze was fixed on the cityscape visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Seattle glittered below alive with neon lights. Yet in this room, everything felt suffocating. "You should be in bed," he replied, voice low but dismissive. "I can't sleep." She stepped closer, her silk robe brushing against the wooden floor. "Perhaps because I'm expected to lie alone every night, while my husband buries himself in work and scotch." His hand froze on the glass. Slowly he turned to her, his blue eyes sharp as steel. "We agreed to separate rooms." "You agreed," Naomi corrected, her tone calm but firm. "I was never given a choice." A silence fell tense and electric. Jonathan studied her as though searching for the submissive wife he once knew. Instead, he found fire. "You're playing a dangerous game, Naomi," he warned. Her lips curved in the faintest smile. "Or I've finally learned how to play." Without waiting for his reply, she turned and left, her heart thundering. The following weekend, Jonathan hosted a charity auction at a glass-domed hotel in downtown Seattle. The elite gathered in glittering gowns and sharp tuxedos, bidding millions on art pieces while sipping champagne. Naomi, draped in emerald silk, walked at Jonathan's side with poise that belied the whispers trailing her. "She's pretty but unrefined. Do you think she married for money? Jonathan deserves better." The comments no longer sliced her open. They hardened her resolve. As Jonathan drifted toward a circle of business magnates, Naomi found herself intercepted by Daniel Parker. "Naomi," he greeted, his smile dazzling beneath the chandelier light. "You look exquisite tonight. That dress, it's almost wasted here. You should be walking a red carpet, not hiding in Jonathan's shadow." She arched an eyebrow. "And yet here you are, hiding in his shadow as well." Daniel chuckled, unfazed. "Touché. But tell me, do you truly feel like his wife? Or just an accessory for display?" Naomi met his gaze unflinching. "I know what I am, Daniel. Do you—" The sharpness of her tone surprised him, but instead of recoiling, his interest deepened. "You've changed," he murmured. "I like it." Before Naomi could respond, Jonathan appeared at her side. His hand rested lightly at her waist, a gesture so unfamiliar it startled her. "Daniel," Jonathan said, his voice cool, "don't you have better things to do than pester my wife?" The tension between the two men was palpable, a storm threatening to break. Naomi felt the possessive weight of Jonathan's touch, and for the first time, the mask of indifference on his face slipped just slightly. Later that night, as the last guest departed and the auction concluded, Naomi sat in Jonathan's sleek black limousine. The city lights streaked past the tinted windows, but her mind was on Daniel's words and Jonathan's sudden display of possession. "You didn't have to step in," she said quietly. Jonathan's gaze flicked to her, sharp and assessing. "Daniel was out of line. He always has been. Yet you've never cared before." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for his cufflinks, carefully sliding them off. "You're my wife," he said finally. "I won't have others disrespecting you." Naomi let out a soft laugh, not mocking, but tinged with disbelief. "Funny. You don't seem to mind when that disrespect comes from you." The air between them thickened his silence louder than any argument. Naomi turned her face to the window, her reflection staring back at her, a woman no longer afraid to confront him. Determined not to drown in the role of a trophy wife, Naomi sought independence. The following week, she applied for a junior position at a fashion house in downtown Seattle. It was a small step, but a vital one. When Jonathan discovered her plans over breakfast, his reaction was swift. "You don't need to work," he said, his voice clipped. Everything you could ever want is here. Naomi set down her coffee cup with deliberate grace. Everything I could want is here. But what I want is my own life. His eyes narrowed. You think this family will tolerate the humiliation of their daughter-in-law working in retail? She replied evenly. That this family has humiliated me more than I can count. One more won't make a difference. The clash was inevitable, but Naomi no longer backed down. Jonathan's silence as she rose from the table was not victory, but acknowledgement. He was beginning to realize she could not be controlled. One rainy evening, Naomi returned from her interview to find Daniel waiting outside the estate gates. His car idled sleek and predatory, his umbrella shielding him from the storm. Need a ride? He asked, his tone smooth. Naomi hesitated, but declined. No, thank you. Naomi. Daniel called as she walked past. His voice softened, almost sincere. He doesn't deserve you. He never has. For a fleeting moment, Naomi faltered. But then she remembered Jonathan's icy silences, the endless nights of emptiness, and the fire in her chest reignited. Perhaps she said, her tone sharp as the rain. But it's not your place to decide who deserves me. She left him standing there, drenched in both rain and rejection. Jonathan watched the exchange from the shadowed balcony above, his jaw tight. That night, Jonathan entered Naomi's room without knocking. His eyes were darker than she had ever seen storm clouds, barely contained. You met Daniel outside, he said, voice low. Naomi looked up from the book she was reading. I didn't meet him. He was waiting for me. I walked away. Jonathan stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. He wants you. Does that bother you? She asked, her voice steady, daring him to answer. For a moment, his mask cracked. Yes. The confession stunned her, leaving the room suspended in silence. Naomi's heart raced, but she forced her voice to remain calm. Then consider what it means to value something before someone else does. Jonathan stared at her, unblinking, as though she had struck him. Then, without a word, he turned and left the door slamming shut behind him. Naomi lay awake long after midnight, her thoughts a tangled storm. She had wanted independence, strength, dignity, and she was claiming them step by step. Yet each confrontation with Jonathan shook her, his contradictions unraveling the neat lines she had drawn between love and hate. He was cold, distant, and often cruel. And yet, for the first time, he had admitted something: real jealousy. Outside, the rain battered the windows, relentless and wild. Naomi pressed her palm against the glass, her reflection merging with the storm. This was only the beginning. The fracture in their silence had begun, and fractures once made could never be undone. The morning sun spilled golden light across Seattle, glinting off the mirrored towers and bustling streets. Naomi Green stood at the entrance of a downtown boutique fashion house, her heart pounding with nerves and determination. She had traded the Hill Estate's marble silence for this glass door's polished runways and the scent of fresh fabrics. For the first time since her rebirth, Naomi felt like she was walking into her own story rather than Jonathan's. Mrs. Hill, the receptionist, asked politely, recognizing her immediately. Just Naomi, she corrected with a small smile. Here I'm only Naomi. Mannequins were dressed in flowing silks. Sketches littered long oak tables, and young designers argued passionately over hemlines and colors inside the design studio. Naomi inhaled the creative chaos like fresh air. Her role was modest, a junior assistant responsible for errands, fabric swatches, and steaming dresses. It was menial work to outsiders unworthy of a billionaire's wife. But to Naomi, it was a declaration she would no longer live by anyone's charity. That evening, she returned to the estate exhausted but fulfilled. She expected indifference from Jonathan as always. Instead, She found him in the dining room, jacket off, tie loosened, waiting. "You didn't tell me you'd be late," he remarked, voice calm but edged. Naomi raised an eyebrow. "I didn't realize I needed permission to work overtime." His jaw tightened. "It's not about permission. It's about appearances. My wife." "Your wife," Naomi interrupted, her tone sharp but steady, "is more than a polished figure to stand at your side. If that threatens your precious appearances, then it's time you reconsider what kind of marriage you wanted in the first place." Jonathan's eyes darkened, but he said nothing more. He left the table, silence trailing in his wake. Naomi's pulse raced, but for once she felt victorious. Daniel Parker watched while Naomi was learning to pin fabrics and navigate deadlines. It began with whispers in the industry, a rumor that Naomi was working not for independence, but to meet men, photographers, designers, investors. The whispers were subtle, like threads woven into the air, impossible to trace back, but unmistakably deliberate. One afternoon, Naomi was assisting with a photo shoot. The lead photographer, a charming man named Marcus, with laughter in his eyes, complimented her. "You have an eye for detail," he said. "Consider stepping in front of the camera instead of behind it." Naomi smiled politely, shaking her head. "I'm here to work, not to be seen." The exchange was innocent. But the next day, society blogs ran a headline: "Mrs. Hill seen laughing intimately with photographer Marcus Lane." When Naomi read it, her blood ran cold. That night, Jonathan entered her room with the paper in hand. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with restrained fury. "Care to explain this?" he asked, tossing the magazine onto her desk. Naomi's breath caught as she saw the grainy photo, her leaning slightly toward Marcus, smiling at something he'd said. The camera angle made it look far more intimate than reality. "It was nothing," she said quickly, "a conversation during work." Jonathan's voice was low, dangerous. "Nothing becomes a scandal when your last name is Hill." Her hands trembled, but her voice remained calm. "Do you believe this nonsense?" He hesitated, just long enough for Naomi's heart to ache. "You do," she whispered, realization sinking in. "You're ready to think the worst of me." Jonathan stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, but she met his gaze without flinching. "If you can't trust me," she said, her voice trembling with anger and hurt, "then perhaps this marriage is even more hollow than I thought." The words hung between them, sharp and unyielding. Jonathan turned away, raking a hand through his hair. His mask of control cracked for the first time, not into anger, but something almost vulnerable. But before either could say more, the silence swallowed them whole. The next morning, Naomi arrived at work with her chin lifted, despite the whispers swirling around her. Designers glanced at her with curiosity. Assistants murmured behind her back, but she pressed forward. She learned quickly how to navigate demanding clients, calm, flustered models, and adjust a hem seconds before a runway show. Slowly, she earned respect not as Jonathan Hill's wife, but as Naomi Green. Naomi's heart soared with a pride she had never known before when her supervisor praised her for handling a chaotic fitting session. This was hers. At Hill Global's headquarters, Jonathan sat in his corner office overlooking the Puget Sound, the gossip magazine lying unopened on his desk. He had thrown it aside earlier, furious at himself for even letting doubt creep in. He remembered Naomi's eyes when she had asked, "Do you believe this nonsense?" He should have answered immediately without hesitation. But he hadn't, and that hesitation haunted him. Jonathan Hill, master of empires, feared no rival, bowed to no threat. Yet the thought of losing Naomi unsettled him in ways he couldn't explain. When Daniel Parker strolled into his office later that week, smirking with feigned concern, Jonathan nearly lost his composure. "She's blossoming, isn't she?" Daniel drawled. "Naomi, working, smiling, laughing." Some might say she's finally alive. Jonathan's hands clenched into fists beneath his desk. Careful, Daniel. Daniel chuckled. Don't look at me like that. I'm only pointing out what everyone else sees. Your wife may not need you. When Daniel left, Jonathan remained staring out the window long after sunset, battling emotions he had buried for too long. That weekend, Naomi returned from work to find Jonathan waiting in the foyer, his expression unreadable. I'll drive you tomorrow, he said abruptly. Naomi blinked. To work? Yes. It was not a question, not a request. But his tone was different, not command, but insistence, as though he could not bear to let her slip away. Naomi hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse to guard the independence she had fought so hard to gain. But another part that remembered the girl who had once loved him hopelessly wanted to see where this would lead. All right, she said finally. Jonathan's sleek black car pulled outside the fashion house the next morning. He stepped out, opening the door for her. Cameras flashed immediately, society bloggers swarming to capture the image Jonathan Hill, usually so aloof, escorting his wife, like a man unwilling to let her out of sight. For once, Naomi didn't shrink from the attention. She lifted her chin, walking beside him with quiet pride. But even as Naomi took her first real strides toward freedom, and Jonathan struggled against the chains of his own pride, Daniel Parker's smile lingered in the background. Daniel raised a glass with a journalist at a bar across town, sliding an envelope across the table. Inside were photographs Naomi, laughing at work, Jonathan's hand possessively at her waist, and a few carefully edited shots, meant to ignite scandal. Print them, Daniel said smoothly. Let's see how long their fragile marriage survives the storm. The journalist grinned, pocketing the envelope. Back at the Hill estate, Naomi gazed at the Seattle skyline from her window, unaware of the storm brewing. She had tasted independence, defied whispers, and found strength in herself. But the world she was stepping into, money, power, and ruthless ambition, would not allow her peace so easily. And somewhere in the shadows, Daniel Parker's venom dripped slowly, ready to poison everything she was building. Miami shimmered like a jewel beneath the blazing sun. Palm trees swayed against the turquoise coastline, and the glittering skyline promised beauty and danger. It was the perfect stage for the charity gala. Jonathan Hill had agreed to sponsor an event where America's elite would mingle, laugh, and make their fortunes shine under the chandeliers of the Oceanside Hotel. It was her first time stepping into the Miami social circuit for Naomi Green. She had chosen a gown of midnight blue silk, the color deep enough to echo the Atlantic just beyond the glass walls. A single diamond pendant rested at her throat, not Jonathan's gift, but her own, a reminder of her independence. When she descended the grand staircase of the hotel lobby, Jonathan's eyes found her immediately. His gaze lingered too long, breaking his usual mask of indifference. Naomi felt its weight, heavy and unspoken, before he looked away. The gala sparkled with champagne flutes and laughter. Reporters buzzed at the entrance, their flashes relentless. Naomi stood at Jonathan's side, poised and graceful, her smile soft but guarded. Yet beneath the polished surface, tension simmered. Whispers rustled like silk through the crowd. Did you see the pictures? She and that photographer? Marcus Lane. How humiliating for Jonathan Hill. Naomi caught fragments as she passed, her blood chilling with each word. She turned sharply toward Jonathan, searching his face for a sign he had heard, but his expression was carved in stone. Still, the whispers grew. Screens of phones lit up around the room, grainy photos of Naomi leaning toward Marcus, Daniel's orchestrated poison spreading like wildfire. It happened quickly, cruelly. A journalist bold enough to pierce the glittering armor of the gala raised her voice during the auction intermission. Mrs. Hill, she called, her tone sweet, but dripping venom. What's it like to balance a career in fashion with such close friendships in the photography world? The room fell silent. Heads turned. Naomi froze, her heart thundering. Jonathan's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Naomi stepped forward. Her voice was clear, calm, every word sharpened like a blade. If professionalism is now considered scandalous, then the true shame lies not in the photos, but in how quickly people believe lies. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The journalist faltered, caught off guard by Naomi's poise. Daniel Parker, watching from across the room with a glass of whiskey in hand, narrowed his eyes. This was not the broken, timid Naomi he had expected. Jonathan remained silent through it all, his expression unreadable. But inside, conflict raged. He had seen the photos. He had doubted her. And now, watching her stand tall, defiant against the murmurs of the elite, he realized something twisted in his chest: pride and guilt. When the crowd finally dispersed back to their champagne, Jonathan leaned toward her, his voice low. "You shouldn't have had to defend yourself." Naomi's gaze flicked to him, steady but wounded. "Yet you didn't defend me either." The truth in her words cut him deeper than he cared to admit. Later that night, the gala moved to the hotel's poolside terrace, lit with fairy lights between palm trees. Guests lounged with cocktails, laughter mingling with the ocean breeze. Naomi stood by the pool's edge, her reflection rippling beneath the glowing surface. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. Then, Daniel approached. "You handled that well," he said smoothly, sipping his drink. "It almost made me believe that you don't care what they think." Naomi's lips tightened. "I don't care what you think." Daniel chuckled. "Oh, but you should. After all, appearances matter, don't they? How long do you think Jonathan will tolerate the whispers before he decides his empire can't survive them?" Naomi turned to face him fully, her eyes sharp as glass. "If you think I'll crumble, Daniel, you're mistaken. I've been broken before and I survived. I won't break again." For the first time, Daniel's smirk faltered. Naomi lifted her chin and walked away, leaving him fuming. But the night had one final cruelty. As Naomi crossed the terrace, a woman in a sequined gown brushed past too quickly. Naomi stumbled, her heel catching on the edge of the poolside tile. She instantly lost her balance, her body plunging into the cold water with a splash that silenced the crowd. Gasps erupted. Laughter followed, cruel and sharp. Phones flashed again, capturing every second of her humiliation. Naomi surfaced, hair clinging to her face gown, heavy with water. For a brief, searing moment, she felt the old humiliation threaten to drag her under again. Then, Jonathan was there. He didn't hesitate. His jacket hit the ground as he waded in strong hands, pulling her out of the pool, shielding her from the stairs. He draped his suit over her shoulders, his arm holding her steady as he guided her through the crowd. Not a word was spoken, but his actions roared louder than the whispers. In their hotel suite, Naomi stood shivering in a robe as Jonathan handed her a towel. His shirt clung to him, wet from pulling her from the pool. She looked at him, truly looked, and for once the mask was gone. His eyes were raw, conflicted, something unguarded, flickering beneath the blue ice. "Why did you do that?" she asked softly. Jonathan's reply was immediate. "Because I couldn't stand to see you hurt." Naomi's heart stuttered. It was the closest thing to confession she had ever heard from him. But she steeled herself, unwilling to surrender too easily. "You should start by protecting me from more than just the water." Jonathan froze, her words cutting deep. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, tense, fragile, charged. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than she had ever heard. "I'll try." The next morning, Naomi woke to find a note left on her nightstand in Jonathan's precise handwriting. "I've already called the papers. They will retract the story. No one will question you again." She traced the letters with trembling fingers. For the first time, Jonathan wasn't just shielding his empire, he was shielding her. But even as warmth spread in her chest, a shadow lingered. Because Naomi knew Daniel Parker was far from finished, and Jonathan's promise to try was not the same as giving her his trust. Daniel watched the viral clip of Naomi falling into the pool in a darkened bar across Miami. The crowd's laughter echoed through the speakers, but his smile was thin. "She's stronger than I thought," he muttered, draining his glass. "But everyone has a breaking point." He picked up his phone, dialing a number with deliberate calm. It's time for the next step. Far from Miami's glitz, a new storm began to brew, one that would test Naomi's strength and the fragile unspoken bond growing between her and Jonathan. And when the storm came, neither of them would emerge unchanged. The flight back from Miami was wrapped in silence. Outside the private jet's window, clouds drifted in endless layers of white, but tension coiled like smoke inside. Naomi sat near the window, the reflection of her face merging with the sky. Her gown from the gala had been replaced with a simple cashmere sweater, her hair tied back, but she could still feel the ghost of eyes on her. The whispers, the laughter, the sting of scandal. Across the aisle, Jonathan worked on his laptop, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. Yet every so often, Naomi felt his gaze flicker toward her. She didn't acknowledge it. She was too busy trying to calm the storm inside her. Jonathan closed the distance between them when the plane finally touched down in Seattle. He rested his hand lightly on her lower back as they descended the steps to the waiting car, a gesture small but deliberate. Cameras flashed. For the world, it was an image of unity. It was something else for Naomi, a question she wasn't ready to answer. Back at the Hill estate, the rhythm of their life shifted subtly. Naomi noticed it in small ways. Jonathan arrived home earlier than usual. Jonathan dismissed his staff so they could dine alone, and Jonathan watched her with a gaze too heavy to ignore. One evening, she set her book aside as he entered the room. "You're home early." He poured himself a drink, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't see a reason to stay late at the office anymore." Naomi's brows arched. "Hill Global doesn't run itself, Jonathan." His lips curved faintly. "It does when it needs to. Some things are more critical." The intensity in his voice sent a shiver through her. She looked away quickly, her heart betraying her calm facade. The next morning, Naomi prepared to leave for the fashion house. She slipped into a modest cream blouse and black trousers, gathering her portfolio. As she reached the front door, Jonathan appeared. "I'll drive you," he said. Naomi blinked. "That's not necessary." "I didn't ask if it was necessary." His tone was low, brooking no argument. Her pulse quickened, but she forced a steady reply. "I appreciate the offer, but I can manage." Jonathan's jaw tightened. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, with surprising restraint, he stepped aside. Naomi walked past him, her heels clicking against the marble floor, but she felt his gaze follow her to the car. At work, Naomi threw herself into her tasks, determined to ignore the murmurs of gossip still lingering after Miami. But late that afternoon, she caught sight of Marcus the photographer at the center of the fabricated scandal. He greeted her with an easy smile. "Rough few weeks for you," he said kindly. "Ignore the noise. They'll move on." Naomi offered a small smile of gratitude. "Thank you." It was innocent, brief. But when she exited the building, Jonathan's car was waiting at the curb. He stepped out, his eyes cold as ice as they flicked from Marcus to Naomi. "You've been busy," he remarked, his tone edged with steel. Naomi stiffened. He was being polite. Jonathan's gaze burned. Polite is a man keeping his distance from someone else's wife. Anger flared in her chest. "And what about the distance you've kept, Jonathan? Years of it." For once, he had no reply. That night, their argument spilled into the quiet of her bedroom. Jonathan closed the door behind him, his voice low but dangerous. "I won't tolerate you being around men like him." Naomi rose to her feet, fury in her eyes. "You don't get to dictate who speaks to me. Not anymore." His hand slammed against the wall beside her, caging her in his body towering over hers. His breath was ragged, his control slipping. "I can't stand it," he admitted hoarsely. "The thought of anyone else near you looking at you the way they do. It makes me want to burn the whole world down." Naomi's heart pounded, torn between fear and something more dangerous, desire. Her voice trembled, but she forced it out. "That's not love, Jonathan. That's possession." His gaze softened, if only for a heartbeat. "Maybe, but it's real, and it's mine." The silence that followed was charged so thick it nearly suffocated her. Naomi pushed past him, retreating to the window. "If you want me," she whispered, her voice breaking, "then prove it's love, not control." Jonathan stood frozen, her words slicing deeper than any blade. The next day, Daniel Parker visited a friend at the fashion house. He found Naomi in the design studio, her hands busy with swatches. "Naomi," he said smoothly, his smile like a knife hidden in silk. "You shine brighter every time I see you. But tell me how long before Jonathan dims that light again?" Naomi's jaw tightened. "You don't know him." Daniel leaned closer. "Oh, I know him better than you think. Jonathan doesn't know how to love Naomi. He only knows how to control. He'll cage you, suffocate you until you forget who you are." Naomi's voice was steady, but her heart wavered. Better a cage than poison. Daniel laughed softly, unbothered. "We'll see." That evening, Jonathan waited for Naomi in the estate's library. When she entered, he didn't look at her immediately. Instead, he poured 2 glasses of wine, his movements sharp with restraint. "I know Daniel was at your office today," he said finally. Naomi froze. "How I have eyes everywhere." He cut in, his tone clipped. "And I won't let him near you again." She bristled. "You don't own me, Jonathan." His eyes met hers, fierce and unyielding. "Don't I?" The words sent a shiver down her spine, not of fear, but of something she couldn't name. She stepped closer, her voice low but defiant. "You want me? Then prove it's not just jealousy. Prove it's love." Jonathan's hand tightened around his glass until it nearly shattered. He set it down slowly, his breath ragged. I don't know how he confessed the words, raw, jagged. But I'll learn for you. That night, Jonathan didn't return to his own wing of the estate. Instead, he sat silently in a chair in Naomi's room, watching the rise and fall of her breath as she slept. He had built empires, crushed rivals, and ruled boardrooms without hesitation. But Jonathan Hill felt powerless before the woman he both desired and feared losing. And yet, for the first time, he wanted to fight not for his pride appearances, but for her. Naomi stirred in her sleep, a faint frown crossing her face. Jonathan reached out instinctively, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "I'll learn," he whispered into the dark, "even if it destroys me." Outside the estate, Daniel Parker stood in the shadows of the gate, his car idling behind him. He watched the glowing windows of the Hill mansion, his jaw tight, his eyes glinting with malice. "They're unraveling," he muttered to himself. "It's only a matter of time." He lit a cigarette, the ember glowing in the night. "The fire of possession," he said softly, exhaling smoke. "Let it consume them both." And somewhere within the mansion, Naomi and Jonathan stood on the fragile edge of something that could either break them apart forever or finally draw them together. Seattle's rain returned with vengeance, drumming against the windows of the Hill estate like 1,000 impatient fingers. The storm mirrored Naomi Green's heart, restless and uneasy. In the days since Jonathan's raw confession, "I don't know how to love, but I'll learn. For you." Something between them had shifted. He hovered closer, not with words, but with presence, pulling out her chair at dinner, appearing at her office, unannounced, watching her with eyes that carried both longing and torment. And yet, shadows trailed them everywhere. Daniel Parker's smirk lingered in Naomi's mind, warning like a curse. He'll cage you until you forget who you are. But Naomi didn't have time to dwell. A storm far greater than words was already brewing. One morning, Naomi's supervisor at the fashion house handed her an envelope. "A private launch in downtown Seattle," she explained. "Our designs will be featured. I'd like you to attend on behalf of the team." Naomi's heart soared. It was the opportunity she had been waiting for, her chance to prove she was more than Jonathan Hill's wife. But when Jonathan heard, his expression darkened. "You're not going," he said flatly. Naomi's jaw tightened. "This is my work, Jonathan, not yours." He exhaled sharply, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You don't understand. These events, they attract attention. You'll be exposed to what," Naomi cut in, her voice trembling with frustration. "Rumors, whispers. I've survived worse. I won't hide in your shadow forever." Jonathan stared at her for a long, tense moment, then relented. "Fine, but I'm coming with you." Naomi didn't argue. Deep down, she was relieved. What neither of them knew was that Daniel Parker had orchestrated the invitation. The event glittered with lights and champagne and was hosted in a renovated warehouse turned art gallery. Music swelled, models drifted through the crowd in silk gowns, and the air was thick with perfume and ambition. Naomi shone that night, radiant in a fitted ivory dress that hugged her figure, yet spoke of elegance. Jonathan walked beside her, sharp in his black suit, commanding every corner of the room. Naomi allowed herself to enjoy it for a brief, stolen hour, the compliments from designers, the pride swelling in her chest. She felt almost free. Then it happened. As she stepped onto the mezzanine level with Jonathan at her side, a man stumbled from the shadows. His face masked a glint of metal flashing in his hand. Gasps erupted, a gun. Naomi froze. Her breath caught in her throat. The man's eyes locked on her, wild, desperate. "You ruined me," he shouted, voice hoarse. "Can you rise above us?" It was chaos. Guests screamed. Security scrambled. But before Naomi could react, Jonathan moved. He shoved her behind him, his body shielding hers completely. The gun fired. The crack split the air louder than thunder. Jonathan staggered, the bullet tearing through his shoulder. His breath hitched, pain flashing across his face. But he didn't fall. He pushed Naomi further into cover, his grip on her arm fierce. "Stay down," he growled, his voice low, commanding, protective. The gunman was subdued within minutes, tackled by security. But for Naomi, time slowed to a crawl. She pressed her trembling hands against Jonathan's wound, warmth flooding her palms. His blood seeped through her fingers. "No, no, no." Her voice broke, panic lacing each word. "Jonathan, stay with me." He gritted his teeth, trying to remain upright. His eyes found hers, blue ice now softened by pain. "Are you hurt?" Her heart clenched. Even bleeding, even collapsing, his first thought was her. "I'm fine," she whispered, tears streaking her cheeks. "You're not. Please don't talk. Hold on." Sirens wailed in the distance. Naomi clung to him as paramedics rushed in, her world narrowing to the sound of his ragged breaths. Hours later, Naomi sat in the sterile hallway of Seattle Grace Hospital, her hands still stained crimson. Every second stretched into eternity. When the surgeon finally emerged, Naomi shot to her feet. "He's stable," the doctor said. "The bullet missed vital organs. With rest, he'll recover." Relief washed over her so violently that her knees nearly gave out. She was allowed into his room once the worst was over. Jonathan lay pale against white sheets, his shoulder bandaged, his breath shallow but steady. Naomi pulled a chair to his bedside, her hand trembling as she reached for his. She had seen him powerful, unyielding, untouchable. But here, broken by blood and sacrifice, he was human. Her voice cracked. "Why, Jonathan? Why would you do that?" His eyes opened slowly, locking onto hers. His lips curved into the faintest smile, weak but genuine. "Because losing everything would mean nothing if I lost you." Naomi's chest tightened, her tears spilling freely. For 2 nights, Naomi refused to leave his side. She held his hand when fever gripped him, whispered reassurances when pain twisted his features, and brushed damp hair from his forehead when he drifted into restless sleep. She thought of all the years she had begged silently for even a sliver of affection. And now he had bled for her. Was this control possession? Or was this love raw and unspoken? Her heart didn't know the answer. But her soul whispered one truth: she could no longer see him as merely the cold husband who had caged her. He was the man who had thrown himself into the line of fire for her. Meanwhile, Daniel Parker smashed his glass against the wall in the darkened corner of a private club. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he snarled. The masked gunman had been meant to frighten Naomi, not to injure Jonathan. The plan was to sow chaos and paint Jonathan incapable of protecting her. Instead, Jonathan had emerged as her savior. Daniel's associate shifted nervously. "What now?" Daniel's eyes narrowed, his voice a venomous whisper. "What now? We wait. A wound doesn't heal a marriage. It only leaves a scar, and scars are easier to tear open." On the 3rd night, Jonathan stirred awake to find Naomi slumped against his bed, her head resting on folded arms. Strands of hair fell across her face, exhaustion evident in every line of her posture. He reached weakly, brushing his fingers against her cheek. Her eyes fluttered open, heavy with sleep and unshed tears. "You stayed," he murmured. "Of course I stayed," she whispered. "Where else would I be?" A silence stretched between them, fragile, heavy with words unspoken. Finally, Jonathan spoke, his voice raw. "I could live without love and didn't need it. But when I saw that gun, when I thought I'd lose you, I realized I've been lying to myself." Naomi's breath caught. Jonathan's gaze burned even through the haze of pain. "Naomi, I don't just want you. I love you." Her heart stuttered, and every wall she had built trembled. But she wasn't ready to surrender, not yet. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Then prove it. Not with blood, not with sacrifice. Prove it every day." Jonathan's lips curved into a faint, pained smile. "I will." As dawn broke, Naomi stood by the hospital window, watching the city awaken. The storm had passed, but the streets still glistened with rain. Behind her, Jonathan slept, his chest rising steadily, his face pale but peaceful. She touched the glass, her reflection merging with the sunrise. For the first time, her heart dared to hope. But hope was fragile. And in the shadows of Seattle, Daniel Parker was already plotting his next move, one that would not merely wound, but destroy. The game was no longer whispers and rumors. It was war. The Hill estate in Boston loomed like a fortress of old money. Red brick walls climbed high into the gray New England sky, ivy wrapping around them like veins of history. It was here that generations of the Hill dynasty had been raised, groomed, and tested. And Naomi Green now stood summoned not as a guest, but as an accused. Jonathan was still recovering from his wound, but Eleanor Hill, the formidable matriarch, had wasted no time. "Bring her to Boston," the letter said, "and the family will no longer remain silent." As Naomi stepped out of the car and into the chill Boston air, she felt every pair of eyes on her. Relatives in tailored coats and pearl necklaces lingered by the grand doors, whispering as she passed. There she is, the girl who dragged Jonathan into scandal after scandal. He nearly died because of her. Naomi lifted her chin, her heels clicking against the marble steps. She would not bow, not anymore. Inside the drawing room, a fire roared in the hearth, though the atmosphere was anything but warm. Eleanor Hill sat at the head of the long mahogany table, her silver hair pulled into a severe knot, her diamond brooch glinting under the chandelier. Around her, uncles, cousins, and family advisors gathered like vultures waiting for a meal. Naomi was led to the opposite end of the table, standing alone as their gazes pierced her. Eleanor's voice cut through the silence. "Naomi Green, do you understand what you have cost this family?" Naomi met her gaze evenly. "Jonathan's injury was not my fault." "Not your fault." Eleanor's voice dripped with scorn. "Jonathan would never have been exposed if you had not insisted on chasing attention in the fashion world. He bled because of you. He nearly died because of you." Whispers rose around the table, harsh and accusing. Naomi's hands trembled at her sides, but she steadied them. "Jonathan made his choice. He protected me because he wanted to." "You speak as though I dragged him into the line of fire myself. Enough!" Eleanor snapped her palm, striking the table. "You are nothing but a distraction. This family has tolerated your presence out of respect for Jonathan's stubbornness, but we will not watch him throw away his legacy for you. Sign the papers. Leave him. That is the only way you can prove you care for his future." The room held its breath, waiting for her to collapse, to beg, to cry. But Naomi stood straighter, her voice steady, resonant. "I cared for Jonathan long before your legacy ever mattered to me. And I will not be the scapegoat for every wound and every whisper this family cannot silence." Gasps rippled. A cousin muttered, "How dare she?" But Naomi pressed on. Her eyes burned not with tears, but with fire. "If Jonathan's future is so fragile that it crumbles because of me, perhaps it was never as strong as you all claimed. But I know him. He is stronger than you give him credit for. And he is mine, not your pawn, not your heirloom, mine." The room erupted. Voices shouted over each other, accusations flying. Eleanor's face turned cold as marble. "You insolent girl," she hissed. "Can you stand against the Hill family and win?" Naomi's lips curved in the faintest smile. "I don't need to win. I only need to live, and I will live with him." Before Eleanor could retort, the heavy doors of the drawing room swung open. Gasps silenced the room as Jonathan entered. He was pale, his shoulders still bound beneath his tailored coat, but his presence was commanding enough to freeze the air. Each step he took echoed against the marble, slow but deliberate. Jonathan Eleanor began rising to greet him. He raised a hand, silencing her. His gaze swept the room cold and sharp until it landed on Naomi. For a moment, something softened in his eyes. Then he turned to face his family. Jonathan said, "You speak as though Naomi is the problem," his voice low but resonant. "But the problem is this family's obsession with control." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "Jonathan, she is destroying you." "No." His voice cut like a blade. "She is the only reason I'm alive. You think I protected her out of duty, out of weakness? No. I did it because I love her." The words hung in the air like thunder, shocking the room into silence. Gasps erupted. Whispers turned to shouts. "You can't mean that." "Love with her, she'll ruin everything." Jonathan slammed his hand on the table, silencing them all. "Enough. I've built empires, crushed competitors, faced boardrooms filled with men twice my age, and none matters without her. You will not ask her to leave. You will not shame her. If you have a problem with Naomi, you have a problem with me." Naomi's heart pounded, her breath caught. For the first time, Jonathan Hill wasn't just standing near her, he was standing for her. Eleanor's eyes blazed, but even she could see the immovable line in her son's face. For all her power, she had no weapon strong enough to break him here. The family dispersed, muttering, furious, defeated. Eleanor lingered, her gaze sharp as daggers as she looked at Naomi. "This is not over," she whispered. Naomi held her gaze unflinching. "It never is." When Eleanor swept from the room, Jonathan turned back to Naomi. For a long moment, neither spoke. The weight of what had just happened pressed around them heavy, but electric. Finally, Jonathan stepped closer, his voice quieter, rawer. "You didn't back down." Naomi's eyes shimmered. "Neither did you." A silence stretched, filled with everything they couldn't yet say. Jonathan lifted a hand, brushing his fingers gently against her cheek. "I meant every word," he whispered. "I love you, and I will never let them take you from me." Naomi's breath trembled. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe him. Later that night, Naomi stood on the balcony of the Boston estate, the city lights glimmering across the Charles River. Jonathan joined her, his arms sliding around her waist. They stood in silence, the air cool, the future uncertain. But something had changed. Naomi had been fighting alone for years, defending herself in silence. Tonight, Jonathan had taken her side before the world that hated her most. And in that moment, Naomi knew the war was far from over, but they were no longer fighting it apart. Somewhere across town, Daniel Parker received news of the confrontation. He smirked into his glass of bourbon, murmuring, "So he's chosen her over the family. Good. That makes him weaker. And weakness is precisely what I need." The next battle was coming. But for tonight, under the Boston stars, Naomi allowed herself the rarest luxury of all hope. The Hill estate in Boston had grown quieter since the stormy family meeting. But silence did not always mean peace. Naomi Green stood alone in the grand library, her fingers tracing the spines of books older than her lifetime. The fire in the hearth crackled, but she felt cold, as though a shadow clung to her, no matter how brightly the flames burned. That night had been a victory, Jonathan declaring his love, defying his family, choosing her over their legacy. Yet as she closed her eyes, fragments of another lifetime bled into her mind. The sound of Eleanor's voice, "You will never be enough." The taste of bitterness when Daniel whispered lies in Jonathan's ear. The crushing loneliness of being despised, cornered, until she had chosen death as her only escape. Naomi gripped the edge of the bookshelf, her knuckles white. The memories came sharper, clearer, as though some locked door inside her had swung open. That night, Naomi dreamt. She saw herself in another version of this life. A younger Naomi, broken and humiliated, at a grand party. Daniel's smirk haunting her, Eleanor's words, cutting like knives. Jonathan's cold indifference shattering her heart. She saw herself swallowing pills, the world blurring her last breath, a prayer for release. Naomi woke with a gasp, sweat beading her forehead. The Boston dawn spilled pale light through the curtains, but the nightmare clung to her skin. She sat at the edge of the bed for a long time, her heart pounding. She had been given this second chance for a reason. She could not, would not let history repeat itself. When Jonathan entered the room later that morning, he found her seated by the window, her gaze distant. "You didn't sleep," he said quietly. Naomi turned, startled. She tried to mask the tremor in her hands, but his eyes, sharp, perceptive, caught it instantly. "It was just a dream," she murmured. Jonathan stepped closer, crouching before her so their eyes met. His voice was low, stripped of his usual command. "Tell me." For a long moment, Naomi hesitated. Vulnerability was dangerous, she had learned that long ago. But when she met his gaze, something inside her cracked. "I remember," she whispered. "I remember another life. The cruelty, the whispers. How they broke me. How Daniel destroyed me. How your family cornered me until there was nothing left." Her voice shook, tears threatening. And I ended it. I ended everything. Jonathan froze. Shock flickered across his face, followed by a pain she had never seen before. Slowly, his hand covered hers, firm and grounding. That was then, he said, his voice steady, though his eyes burned. This is now. I won't let anyone break you again. Not Daniel, not my family, not even me. Naomi's breath trembled. But what if it happens anyway? What if I'm not strong enough this time? Jonathan's grip tightened. Then I'll be strong enough for both of us. Later that day, Naomi wandered the Boston estate gardens, the winter air sharp against her cheeks. Her thoughts churned with fragments of memory. Daniel's mocking voice, false kindness and schemes. She stopped by the frozen fountain, the water trapped in icy stillness. It was here in her past life that Daniel had cornered her, once whispering poison in her ear. Jonathan will never love you. But I could if you were mine. Her stomach twisted. The truth was clear now. Daniel had never wanted her, only the satisfaction of destroying her, and through her Jonathan. This time, she would not give him that victory. Daniel appeared at the Boston estate that evening, as if conjured by her thoughts. He strode into the hall with his usual arrogance, ignoring the staff's attempts to bar him. Naomi. He greeted, his smile thin. You look pale. Boston doesn't suit you. Naomi's spine straightened. What do you want, Daniel? He chuckled. Only to remind you of reality. Jonathan's declaration of love was touching, but love is fragile. His family despises you. The world laughs at you. How long do you think you can survive before you break again? Her eyes flashed. You broke me once. Never again. Daniel's smirk faltered, if only for a heartbeat. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. We'll see. Jonathan's voice cut through the hall, sharp as steel. Leave. Daniel turned, finding Jonathan at the top of the staircase, pale from his injury, but unyielding. Their gazes clashed, blue fire against cold ambition. You can't protect her forever, Daniel sneered. Jonathan's reply was calm, deadly. Watch me. That night, Naomi stood by the window again, gazing at Boston's city lights. Jonathan rested behind her, his presence steady, his hand warm against hers. Her voice was quiet, but firm. I remember who I was. I remember how I died. And I swear, Jonathan, I won't live that way again. I won't let Daniel or your family write my ending. Jonathan pressed his forehead against hers, his whisper fierce. Then we'll write it together. Naomi closed her eyes, her heart pounding. For the first time, her past didn't feel like a curse. It felt like a weapon. Across Boston, Daniel sat in his penthouse, staring at the city skyline. His glass of bourbon trembled slightly in his hand, his jaw clenched. She remembers, he muttered. Good. That makes her dangerous. But then his lips curved into a slow smile. And dangerous people are easiest to destroy. The stage was set. The past had resurfaced. The future was uncertain, and the fire between Naomi and Jonathan burned hotter than ever. And this time, Naomi vowed she would not be the victim. The Boston sky stretched pale and cold winter's breath, frosting the windows of the Hill estate. Naomi Green sat by the window of her guest room, watching snow fall in delicate spirals onto the city below. Her reflection stared back at her, stronger, sharper, yet haunted by the storm of her past. Jonathan had chosen her, defied his family, even bled for her. But Naomi's heart whispered a question she could not silence. Does he love me for who I am, or because he cannot bear to lose control? It was a dangerous question, but she had lived one life in chains already. In this life, she needed to know the truth. The next morning, Naomi packed a small bag. When Jonathan entered, his expression tightened. Where are you going? he demanded. Naomi's voice was calm, though her pulse trembled. Back to Seattle. To my work. To myself. His jaw clenched. You're not leaving. I am, she said softly. I need space, Jonathan. I need to know if your love is more than possession. If you can let me live my own life without caging me. For a moment, fury darkened his eyes. But then something shifted. His fists unclenched. His shoulders dropped. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. If I let you go, will you come back? Naomi's heart broke at the rawness in his tone. That depends on what you become while I'm gone. She left that afternoon, her heels echoing through the marble halls, leaving Jonathan in the silence of his family's estate. In Seattle, Naomi threw herself into her work at the fashion house. She answered calls, adjusted hems, and soothed the tempers of anxious models. She breathed freedom, tasted independence. Yet she thought of him every night when she lay in her modest apartment. And somewhere across town, Jonathan Hill was learning the unfamiliar language of patience. Instead of storming into her office or demanding her return, he sent small gestures. A delivery of warm tea to her workplace on a freezing day, signed only with his initials. A driver waiting outside late at night, not to force her into his car, but to ensure she was safe. He didn't call. He didn't demand. He waited. It was agony for him. In boardrooms, he commanded with an iron hand. But with Naomi, he was learning restraint. One evening, Naomi stayed late at the fashion house. Snow drifted heavily outside, burying Seattle's streets in white. When she finally stepped out, shivering in her thin coat, she found Jonathan's car idling at the curb. The driver stepped aside, and to her shock, Jonathan emerged, coat draped over his shoulders. "You'll freeze," he said, placing his coat around her before she could protest. Naomi's breath caught. For once, his touch wasn't a command, it was care. Quiet, unspoken human. "Why are you here?" she whispered. His eyes met hers, softer than she had ever seen. "Not to drag you back, to see you home safely." She studied him, searching for hidden control, but found none, only devotion. And for the first time she wondered if love could truly grow from the ashes of possession. But freedom and tenderness did not go unnoticed. Daniel Parker, ever watchful, seethed as he saw the shift in Jonathan. His plan had always been to pit them against each other until Naomi broke. But Jonathan was changing, and that made him more dangerous. Daniel swirled his bourbon at a private bar and murmured to a journalist, "He's losing control. Can't you see? The mighty Jonathan Hill reduced to chasing a woman who doesn't even want him? Write it. Print it. Let the world know he's slipping." The next morning, newspapers screamed, "Jonathan Hill abandons business deals to pursue wife empire at risk." Naomi found Jonathan waiting outside her apartment, the paper folded in his hand. "He said they're saying I'm weak." His voice low, distracted, "that I'll lose everything." Naomi's chest tightened. "And does that matter to you more than me?" He looked at her, then truly looked, as though searching for the answer inside himself. Slowly, he shook his head. "No, not anymore." She reached for the paper, tearing it in half with steady hands. "Then let them talk. You've built empires before. You can make them again. But love is something you don't get to rebuild if you lose it." Jonathan's breath caught at her words. For the first time, he didn't argue. Over the following weeks, Jonathan's transformation unfolded not in grand gestures, but in quiet consistencies. He sat silently in the corner of her workplace, during late nights reading while she worked, offering no interference. He carried her bag when she was too tired, not as an order, but as an instinct. He cooked dinner once, badly burning the steak, filling the apartment with smoke, and Naomi laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. Jonathan, the untouchable CEO, looked utterly human, with a kitchen towel in his hands. It was these moments that weakened the walls around her heart. One evening, Naomi turned to him in her apartment, her voice trembling. "If I asked you to let me go completely, would you?" The silence stretched. Jonathan's jaw worked, his fists clenched, his chest heaved. It was the hardest thing she had ever asked him. Finally, his voice came low, raw. "If that's what you truly wanted." "Yes." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. It was the answer she had been waiting for. Not possession, not control, but love. As Naomi drifted to sleep that night, she felt Jonathan's arms circle her, not as chains, but as warmth. His whisper brushed her ear, soft and broken. "I don't deserve you, but I'll spend the rest of my life proving I can." Once fractured by betrayal and despair, Naomi's heart beat steady in her chest. For the first time, she believed that perhaps this time this life love might not destroy her. But outside their fragile sanctuary, Daniel Parker plotted his final strike. And the storm he was about to unleash would test their fragile hope more than ever. The storm that had haunted Naomi Green's life was about to break. Seattle's night sky was heavy with clouds as she walked hand in hand with Jonathan Hill through the glittering lobby of the Hill Global Tower. It had been weeks since she had seen him soften, weeks since she had watched him learn the quiet art of love. For the first time, she believed they could build a future together. But Daniel Parker was not finished. The following morning, tabloids exploded with a new scandal. A series of photographs splashed across headlines: Naomi in Marcus, the photographer's studio, smiling, standing too close, her hand on his arm. The captions screamed betrayal. Jonathan's board of directors erupted in panic. Shares of Hill Global wavered. Eleanor Hill, icy and furious, declared, "This is the end. She will destroy you." But Naomi knew the truth. Those photographs were taken months ago, innocent, fabricated, twisted by Daniel. "Daniel did this," Naomi said, her voice shaking. "He won't stop until one of us breaks." Jonathan looked at her, his jaw tight, his blue eyes burning with fury. "Then let him come. I'm done running from shadows." Daniel appeared at a charity banquet where Naomi and Jonathan were guests that evening. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, but tension crackled like electricity. Daniel raised a glass, his voice smooth but loud enough to carry to Jonathan Hill, the man who sacrifices an empire for a woman who doesn't love him. Gasps rippled. All eyes turned to Naomi. Daniel's smirk widened. "Tell them, Naomi. Tell them about Marcus. Tell them who you really belong to." Naomi's heart thundered, but her voice was steady, clear as crystal. "I belong to myself first, and to Jonathan second. No rumor, no photograph, no poison you spread will change that." The room erupted. Some sneered, others applauded. Jonathan stepped forward, his presence silencing them all. "You want the truth?" "Daniel." Jonathan's voice was low, dangerous. "The truth is you've spent your life trying to break what you cannot have. But Naomi is not yours to break. She is mine to protect and to love." Daniel's mask finally shattered. Rage contorted his face as he lunged forward, his hand hidden in his jacket. For a horrifying moment, Naomi saw the glint of a knife. Time slowed. Guests screamed, chairs overturned. Jonathan moved first. The knife slashed across his side as he shoved Naomi out of harm's way. Blood blossomed scarlet against his white shirt, but his grip on Daniel's wrist was iron. Security rushed in, wresting the weapon away. Daniel was dragged out, cursing, defeated at last. Naomi fell to her knees beside Jonathan, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, not again, please. Jonathan, stay with me." He cupped her face with blood-stained fingers, his lips curving into a faint, pained smile. "I told you. I'll never let him take you from me." Jonathan's wound was deep, but not fatal. In the quiet of the hospital days later, Naomi sat at his bedside, her hands clasped around his. "I was so afraid," she whispered, "scared I would lose you like before. But I realized something. Love isn't about possession. It's about standing together, even when the world wants to tear us apart." Jonathan's gaze softened, his voice rough with emotion. "Then stand with me, Naomi, for the rest of our lives. Marry me again, not for my name, duty, or love." Naomi's tears fell freely, but her smile was radiant. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Months later, spring sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of a cathedral in Seattle. Naomi walked down the aisle in a gown of ivory lace, her steps steady, her heart full. Jonathan waited at the altar, his eyes shining, no longer the cold, untouchable man he once was, but the man who had bled, fought, and changed for love. Their vows were simple, but every word was accurate. "I was lost until you. I was broken until you made me whole. This time in this life, we choose love." When Jonathan kissed her, the world seemed still, as though even time bowed to their love. 1 year later, laughter filled their Seattle home, glowing with motherhood. Naomi rested her hands on her rounded belly as Jonathan knelt beside her, his palm against her stomach. "Twins," he whispered, awe in his voice. "A boy and a girl." Naomi laughed softly, tears sparkling in her eyes. "A future we never thought we'd have." Jonathan kissed her hands, his voice trembling with devotion. "I would burn the world 1,000 times to hold this moment." And Naomi knew this time their story would not end in pain. It had only just begun. Dear viewers, thank you for following Naomi and Jonathan's journey through love, betrayal, sacrifice, and rebirth. What do you think of their story? Did Jonathan truly redeem himself? Did Naomi find the strength she deserved? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your emotions and reflections. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, share it with friends who love romance, drama, and happy endings, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel so you never miss another heart-stirring story. Because love stories may end, but with you here, new ones are always waiting to be told.